We've been talking this morning about the history of slavery in South Africa and the issue of what slavery means, what constraints there are on humans, and what sort of society we want. We want a society of, or I do, of, and I'm going to stutter on the word again. We want a society, I do, a society of liberty. We want a society that I've been saying now for about a year or two, a society of equality of permission. Now, that means that we allow people to do what they care to do, to venture, you might say. And look, in all societies, there arise constraints on venturing. I don't mean just the constraints that you can't steal from other people, although indeed that is constantly violated in most societies. I believe that taxation is theft. If you decided personally that your next door neighbor was a suitable target for your personal tax on their assets, we call that stealing. But if it's done by majority vote or the decision of the tyrant, we call it taxation. So there arise what can I say? Obstacles to venturing. South Africa at present has a tremendous number of obstacles to venturing. So does another country that I also know slightly and love, namely Brazil. In Argentina right now, a massive experiment is going on in removing the hooks and chairs, as my mom used to say, the hooks and chairs in the way of equality of permission. Now, there was a period of a rise of this idea of equality of permission. It's the first liberalism. It's an 18th century invention. Now, there were precursors, but very few. And they were generally drawn and hanged or drawn and quartered. In 1381, John Ball, a priest, would go around saying, when Adam delved and Eve spun, who then was the gentleman for which she was drawn and quartered? In 1685, Richard Rumbold said on his scaffold, under English law, you were permitted to make a speech from your scaffold. He said, I think there is no man born of God above another, for none comes into the world with a saddle on his back, neither any booted and spurred to ride him. But this view was, shall we say, unpopular until then, and until the 18th century, when it became, among advanced intellectuals like Adam Smith and others, more and more popular, and to some degree It was tried out in Britain, this basically Scottish idea was tried out in Britain, and to some degree in the United States, but we must remember that my country was still a slave country until 1865. And even afterwards, those same people came to be massively constrained, hooks and chairs all over the place, under what we called Jim Crow. I wonder if you know something about South African history that I know. If you don't, you ought to. In the 1920s, the National Party sent a delegation to the southern United States to learn how to do it, which is just appalling. All right. My historical claim as an economic historian is that this brief period of overturning of the masters, another way of expressing equality of permission, allowing you to venture, is you have no master. In the 1880s, somehow a European nobleman had gotten to the Powder River Valley in Wyoming without recognizing much about how ordinary Americans thought of themselves in the 1880s. This is, another European nobleman 50 years before, Tocqueville had understood very well that this was something new, this equality of permission, this absence of masters had spread in the United States. Anyway, this nobleman said to asked a passing cowboy, "Who is your master?" Now, evidently, he wanted to have hospitality from the local lord, as he conceived it. And I can just see the cowboy with a straw in his in his mouth, shifting the straw and saying, "He ain't been born yet." And that's this attitude that spread. You can think of it as an ethical spread of an ending of the belief that we should all have masters, and that there's a great chain of being from the king to the family dog, or from God to the family dog. By the way, dog is God spelled backwards, so this is an important point. And that we're in our positions in society, and that's just and meet and right. And that conviction eroded. Now, it's still around. Still, people think in terms of hierarchies, and some countries are more hierarchically oriented than others. And sometimes, and we have this new hierarchy of massively expanded states, where our masters are over there in Pretoria. All right. my claim, my economic scientific claim, which I've claimed to amass a certain amount of evidence for, is that this change, liberalism, I call it true liberalism, as against what Martin was talking about, the new liberalism of the 1880s in Britain, which is becomes American progressivism and social democracy and communism and fascism. This brief period of expansion, which didn't survive pure, but continued to be quite important in the minds of ordinary people, and was sort of episodically enforced, this equality of permission, with constraints piling up and then being disposed of, and piling up and then being disposed of, inspirited people to innovate. Now, I have a claim that I've made at some length with a good deal of evidence that capital accumulation is not the source of economic growth. I think economists have gradually come to this realization over the last maybe half century that it's not capital accumulation. Now, this, alas, was a sort of original mistake by my hero, Adam Smith. He said it was capital accumulation, and Marx and everyone else followed him. And even Mises, who's another of my heroes, he says this. He believes it, but I think it's false. I think capital accumulation is necessary. To have a nice room like this, you've got to invest, you've got to abstain from consumption to some degree, but that's just a necessary condition for this room. As is a labor force, as is a certain amount of rule of law, so people don't come in and settle in the room, and so forth. But it's only a necessary condition. It's not, so to speak, a sufficient condition. All innovations, I claim, furthermore, are from an individual person. Countries don't innovate. Corporations don't innovate. No institution innovates. Individuals innovate. The new idea comes from someone's head. A famous and very important example is the invention of the box, the container, 1956, by a man without a college degree in North Carolina. From this came, now of course you had to do investment, but you had to do other things too. You had to break the power of the longshoreman, for example, or it wasn't going to happen. You had to have, nonetheless, people willing to work in these facilities, and so forth. So ideas come from individuals, and to focus on capital accumulation, although it's nice to have a capital market, and I'm all for money, and it's a very nice thing, a fine thing, but it's not going to make South Africa rich. It's not going to solve your problem. What's going to solve your problem and the problems of Brazil and the problems of my own country are letting people innovate. And it's individuals who are going to do it. And it's this idea of no masters, I do what I want, I'm not robbing people that has made the modern world. Our friends on the left, and I was once on the left, I was not ever a communist, but I was a kind of soft Trotskyist for a while. And any case, an advocate then eventually for equality of opportunity, which we were discussing before. Equality of opportunity requires someone, namely the state, to provide the opportunities. So only equality of permission is a true liberal position. Otherwise, you're going to have to involve the state. And then there's going to be a big political struggle about whose opportunity. Is it going to be graduates of Stellenbosch, or is it going to be someone else? So, but my friends on the left, I still have many of them, think that it's exploitation that's the cause of modern economic growth. It's a somewhat strange position, of course, because it goes through accumulation of capital. Surplus value is seized by the bosses, they reinvest it, invested, and that makes us rich. And when you think about it, it's quite strange. Out of a theft, an original accumulation of capital, as Marx said, is what makes it all start. It's the the beginning of the sourdough that you keep making, and it's supposed to come from slavery. It's supposed to come from piracy. Marx said it's supposed to come from imperialism. It's supposed to come from somewhere, and then it accumulates. And I've argued at length that that doesn't work either. Neither in economic growth is not caused by foreign trade. That's one of its nice features, but that's not its cause. Innovation is everything. Look around you. Glass. I marvel at modern glass. We use glass for walls. We use glass for doors. In my hotel, there's a floor plate which is transparent. You can look down, and I don't like to walk on it, but it's glass. That's what made us well off. And it's also institutional innovations. 1810, the University of Berlin, invented, so to speak, by Humboldt, which was the definition of a modern university, is combining teaching and research, not splitting them, but combining them. And that was a great idea. But so it can be institutional innovation, but it can be mechanical, it can be biological, it can be social, but it comes out of individual ideas. So all of this is to say that economic history, to the extent that it is about economic growth, and I don't think that all economic history has to be about economic growth, but if that's your focus, we should be focusing on the context for the free expression and use of ideas. That it's ideas that are the key to the modern world. The idea of ideas is equality of permission, no masters. But the concrete outcome, it turns out, is this explosion of invention innovation. And so far as current policy is concerned, as I've said, what South Africa needs and is not more education, by the way. There's a very common claim in South Africa. What we need to do is get better education. Then we can allow people freedom to start an enterprise. And I say, no, stop focusing on education. Human capital is just another form of investment. And like every other form of investment, it has sharply diminishing returns. And the only way you get a richer country is by moving out the marginal product of whatever, of education, of investment in buildings, in whatever. I often express the point I'm making, and here I'll stop, by drawing, and lots of you are economists here, so I'm sure I can do a diagram in the air, and you'll understand it perfectly well. Here I'm going to draw a production possibility curve, and I'm going to put, let's say, food on this axis, and all other goods on this axis. If you want, we can do it the other way around, but let's not. Here we have food and all other goods. And here's the production possibility curve per person. Let me get right here. Per person in South Africa now. Now, what was the production possibility curve per person in 1806? Well, here it is now. What did it look like then? Well, here's the origin right here. 0. Now watch. It's here. And to get from here to there is innovation. And then you have to have roads and highway, you have to have states, and you have to have stuff going on besides that. But that's it. What makes it worthwhile to build a road is innovation. What makes it worthwhile to have a university is innovation. So anyway, that's my claim. And you can see that it's a big reorientation of both economic history but also economics. Because instead of we have this absurdity of growth theory, which we teach to our students. And it's massively beside the point, because it's all about capital accumulation. And our friends and enemies on the left agree on that point, and they say, we got to expropriate the expropriators, because capital accumulation is where all the action is, and it's not. And you can kind of see how it fits into our conversation this morning, because it's the liberation of individual people. In your study, you have their names, that makes for innovation and makes for the modern world. So what we need to do is we need to refocus economics on the conditions for individual creativity. And that doesn't that's not necessarily a matter of equality of opportunity. The main thing is to let people innovate. Now, one last point. This innovation is not just about Thomas Edison. It's not just about the fancy big innovations. an individual person, some woman notices that it would be a good idea in this neighborhood to have a hair salon. And, you know, I'm very much in need of a hair salon. And I want them to be more of them so they're cheaper. They're very expensive in the United States because we've got obstacles to entering that industry. That's innovation. The man who moves vigorously, illegally, across the border into South Africa in order to work is innovating. Innovation is where it's at. And that's what we should be talking about if our question is how to get well off. So this is a kind of quick summary of my work for the last 20 years.